Hey everyone, Zach from thebarbellphysio.com, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite pieces of equipment, and that is the Thompson Fat Pad bench press pad. All right, so before we dive into the specifics of this, let me tell you why I got the Fat Pad in the first place. So as I was really trying to dial in my bench press technique several years ago, I found that the more aggressive I got with my leg drive, which is a key component of bench press form, the better my bench got. The problem was though, as I got to heavier and heavier weights, I started to notice that that leg drive would do two things. Number one, because I work out in a home gym and I'm not working out on a bench that is fixed and attached to a frame, I'm working on these free benches that I can move in and out of my rack. I noticed that on cheap benches, as I would get that leg drive, the bench would actually slide around a little bit. And so I'd end up having to put a bunch of weights on the back end of the bench so that that leg drive would not move my bench itself. The second reason why was after I kind of locked down the frame to the ground with what I just described, was that leg drive would then result in me actually sliding up and down the vinyl of most conventional benches that just aren't really sticky. And so I would then end up having to take a bunch of extra resistance bands and tie those resistance bands over the bench so that I had that little bit of stickiness from the band to kind of lock my body down to so I wouldn't be sliding all over the bench. And I was just tired of that. It felt so sketchy and unstable, and I didn't want to be moving maximal weights if I didn't feel like I was locked down on the bench. I followed Donnie Thompson, one of the best powerlifters of all time, for a really long time, and he had started to release his bench press pad at that time through Rogue Fitness. And because he talked about how much sturdier it was, I picked it up because it sounded like the solution, and I have not been disappointed in it at all. It has been absolutely phenomenal of a bench because it has this wider pad. So instead of your standard bench press pad that's about 12 inches wide, this is 14.5 inches wide. So if you've got wide shoulders, that gives you more contact area on the bench. The other thing it has is that this vinyl is really grippy and you don't slide on it very easily. So that combination of two things locks your body down on the bench a lot more. The wider pad also feels like I can set my shoulder blades in position more. I just feel overall stronger and more stable. The pad is also going to be about twice the thickness of most other pads without still having like a lot of give to it, which also makes it really nice for different exercises such as hip thrusts, where you want a little bit more padding there to be a little bit more comfortable on your back as you kind of pivot over the edge of the bench. So the thickness, added width, and the grip are the three things that really sell me on using this bench press pad. Now there are going to be a few differences between this and like your standard Rogue Fitness utility bench. Number one is going to be height. So at least in the model and setup I have, I'm sitting at 17.5 inches off the ground versus your typical Rogue bench, utility bench is at 18 inches off the ground. So a half inch difference there, not that big of a deal. I actually like it being a little bit lower when I'm doing exercises like hip thrust. That makes it a little bit easier to get into position. And then the second thing is going to be the weight of this overall. You don't want to attach this really badass pad to your puny like utility bench frame, because then you're going to have the issue I talked about earlier where when you kick, while you won't slide up and down the bench, you might move that cheap bench around a little bit. So you want to go with something like the monster base here. Now at the time that I purchased this bench, there were no wheels on this. That wasn't an option. Now it is. So in my physical therapy clinic, we've got the Thompson Fat Pad on a wheeled frame, which is so nice because this thing is a monster. It is heavy to lift up. And while I'm certainly strong enough to, there are plenty of workouts where at the end of the workout, I look at moving that bench back to where I store it. And I have to say, I typically leave it for a day and I get to it in my warm up the next morning just because it is a pain in the butt to move it. So make sure when you pick this up, get yourself a nice monster frame with wheels on it. There is one drawback to this large pad, and that's that the large pad is not going to fit on incline benches. If we were to put this on an incline bench, as you raise this up, the thickness of the pad will result in it impinging on the seat. So you can't really turn this into an incline bench without doing something like I'm doing here, where I'm propping one end of the bench up on a box, or bumper plates also work for this. So that gives you the ability to sort of go incline, although you won't have a seat to actually sit your butt on. Not a huge deal for me because I don't do a ton of incline work, but it is something worth considering there. I have reached out to many different bench frame manufacturers as well as custom equipment makers, and I have not been able to find a solution to that. But even with that drawback, I love the pad so much and I feel like I'm in such better positioning benching with it that doesn't matter to me. Certainly you could go and buy a second bench, but in my home gym, I don't want to eat up that much space by having 2 benches in such a small area. The other thing to consider with this is going to be the price. So you are going to get a much better bench press pad here, but that is going to be expensive. So this is the non-competition Thompson Fat Pad. The pad itself, not even counting the base, comes in at $175. So that's expensive compared to other benches and bench pads. But in my opinion, well worth it if you care about moving maximal loads, keeping your shoulders locked in place and healthy if you're going to be doing a lot of bench press. So highly recommend the Thompson Fat Pad if you are looking for a bench press option.